What we have just done in our ancient and medieval history for Tuesday, June 1st, is we saw a clip from a rather unusual topic given this is ancient and medieval history. The topic was a website reviewing the movie Midway about a battle in World War II. And in reviewing Midway, a question was raised about the dedication, which was in a very modern, American, generous, non-judgmental way, dedicated to the sailors of both the American and Japanese navies. And as you will see at home with the video I've included in this, this is a rather bitter pill for certain people to swallow if they understand what the Japanese were like. So there are reasons why I brought this up. We're going to go through them, but a lot of it has to do with the way we look at history. History is not merely an intellectual thing. It's not like learning a language where you get a skill, you understand it. Can you open that all the way, please? History is about moral judgment, which is so uncomfortable for people these days. Moral judgment. You have to decide what's right and wrong. You have to decide what's good and evil. If you don't decide, then what you're doing is creating an equivalency between everyone who fights in every war and between everyone involved in any historical or contemporary struggle. And while war involves killing, the context of that killing, the reasons for killing, the means by which the killing is done, who does the killing, who gets killed, for what reason, all of that stuff kind of matters. Otherwise, there's no difference between a murderer, a bandit, and a soldier. They all kill. But the context is different for a murderer, a bandit, or a soldier. So I've started by opening the floor to questions or comments.
Well, I already got mine answered.
What was your question?
Oh, I was just curious about the whole thing with the dedication part.
Well, that's the point. That's what really caught my attention as I saw this over the weekend. And I thought that this question applied not just to my European students, with whom I've already had this conversation, but to you. Because you're Americans, so am I. Doesn't matter where your ancestors came from, you are Americans. And Americans, for the most part, are nice people. We want the best for us. We want other people to have happy endings. We want nice outcomes. As Americans, we don't like it when there's an unhappy ending. As Americans, we don't like it when bad people succeed. So there's a further assumption that many Americans make, especially if they don't understand much about history. And the assumption is this: people are all the same around the world, under the skin. They're all the same. Sometimes they speak in unusual languages. Sometimes they have unusual clothing. Sometimes they have strange customs. But push comes to shove, people are people. And we're all the same under the skin. Is that true? Is that sort of optimistic, hopeful American view of the world and of people true or not, in your opinion? Yes or no, why or why not? That's a question. I'd rather volunteer, but I will feel free to pick somebody to answer if I need to. Are people all the same under the skin, only minor differences being there for culture? Yes?
Depends on their morals. If some people are more, I don't know how to explain it, but like sometimes.
You can always give an example if you're not sure.
So, morals are something that all humans have. Sometimes they differ depending on what cultures believe. As I guess for the Muslims, they're ready to die at a moment's notice in their jihad, their holy war.
Yep.
And it doesn't count what you do, like if they die they go to heaven. Like if they kill someone, multiple people, they still go to their version of heaven,
Yep.
their paradise.
Yep.
Whereas Christians, I feel like there's more. If they kill someone, multiple people, there's purgatory or hell. They're more
Unless
different.
there's a very good reason.
Right. Yeah. It depends on their cultures, their religions, and what they believe. Like it's different from like an African culture to American culture, or the French to the Germans.
Yeah. I agree, for what it's worth. We are the same species, but we don't live in the natural world. We live in an artificial world of culture. We're like inside a cocoon that we have made over thousands of years of time. And that artificial world of culture tells us right from wrong. It tells us good from evil. It tells us what's normal and what's unusual and what's obscene. And cultures absolutely, positively do not agree about these things. Mary? Cultures come to very different conclusions. Some cultures, very few, permit relatives to have relations with one another, families with one another, the Egyptians for their god kings, for example. But I'll turn the heat up a little bit, or the air conditioning down a little bit. People are shivering. There we go. Ava? Okay. Race doesn't really matter. America proves that. We got people from all over the world. They don't act like they do in the old country. They are raised in the United States. There may be some differences, but the truth is, everyone who comes here, who becomes part of us, becomes an American. So it's not race. But if you grow up in a culture where killing for the faith is not only normal but good, you're going to have different values. Oh, I got it. Than people who grow up thinking that faith is something that should be a matter of persuasion. Anyway, culture. Thank you, Claudia. Other questions, comments, or thoughts based on what you saw?
I think and it's gonna sound rude.
Can you speak up a little?
I said the thing at the end, like the comment with the thing to the Japanese soldiers or whatever, is not sound rude. Ignorant white person thing. Again, like some person, like the guy who directed it was like, "Oh, I'm gonna seem so nice and charitable and like equal, like whatever, you know." He's gonna like, "I'm gonna seem so great for putting this in," and but in the end, he just seemed like really ignorant because he doesn't actually know how like the Japanese soldiers were to like Chinese and like other like in Filipino like other like, you know. I'm just saying that it's like another thing to like seem like you're not like whatever woke or whatever.
That's a very modern. That's a very modern answer. If I understand what you said correctly, let me try to rephrase it so I'm sure that I'm answering what you said. Because the maker of the History Buffs video happens to be white, British. You assuming he's white with his cartoon?
I was talking about the director of the.
Oh!
Yeah.
Ah, good. I'm glad I asked. So, the director, Roland Emmerich, of the movie is white, and he's trying to assume that he doesn't understand what it means to be Japanese.
No, I was saying that he put that in. He put that in as like a thing to seem like he's like woke and whatever, you know, like and he's like he's ignorant to the fact that other Asian people also got brutally murdered. So it's like it's not it wasn't a race thing; it was a culture thing.
Indeed.
And like also assuming that like that's kind of like assuming that all Asian people are like, you know, it's just like a whole thing, and it's like white people trying to like please other cultures.
Well,
like,
which is it's very much part of the woke mentality.
Yeah.
The idea that certain people have to apologize for how they were born.
Yeah.
How dare you? To quote Greta Thunberg, how dare you be born white?
This is like as an Asian person and a Jewish person, like I don't want I don't want to give like thanks to the Japanese people for working with the Nazis, and I don't want to thank them for raping and murdering my mom's ancestors. Like,
Yeah.
bro, what?
Yeah, and that is important. See, I don't think it's enough to know about what the Japanese or the Nazis did. I think you also should react to it. And I think a degree of outrage is called for when you're dealing with something so horrific. I think that outrage is not only a good thing, I think it's necessary. If you don't do that, are you really paying attention to the history? Are you really studying it? Or are you looking like a scientist at what's going on in a petri dish? Completely disinterested, completely cold to the realities. This is atrocity. And to claim that there's a moral equivalency between the perpetrator and the victim, that's like saying, oh yeah, we dedicate this World War II movie to the Jews and to their SS persecutors. No, don't do that. It's a bad idea. Yes.
I'm just genuinely curious. Are there any documented American war crimes?
Yeah, sure. Look, you want to read an anti-American book, get Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
But in addition to above and beyond that, if you really look up the 1619 Project or anything regarding critical race theory, and they will talk about some of the horrors in our past. I think the worst thing that we did as a nation was the Indian blanket trick, which was a Jackson administration era policy designed to send blankets from death wards in Eastern hospitals, filled with virus, out to Indian trading posts and give these wool blankets away to the Indians for practically nothing. It's biological warfare, and it was intentional. However, beep, beep, beep. However, here's the difference. And this is going to be hard for modern people to get. The West is different. We're part of the West. The West starts out with 4 basic cultural strands. The Greeks respect individual human creativity. The Romans respect individual human loyalty. The Christians, coming from the Jews, believe that every individual created is made in God's image and has a spark of God in them. And the Germans insist that people be free to live the lives they want to live and make the important choices in them. As glorious and wonderful as Japanese or Chinese or Asian Indian cultures, they don't have this. This is not part of their tradition. The West is unique in its value of individual life as an end unto itself, not merely a means. The Japanese believed that they were there to serve and protect the God Emperor. That's it. They're a means to an end. As such, they didn't value their own life or the lives of the people around them. The only life that mattered was the emperor, because he's a god, see? He's a descendant of the sun goddess. In China, Confucianism is a wonderful structure of morality and society. It's a philosophy of social harmony. You'll learn a lot about it next year if you're in my class. But Confucianism focuses on the group, on the family, on the society, does not focus on the individual. The individual is a means to a greater end, the family honor. Because of the West's unique focus on the individual, we develop concepts of human rights. We don't always live up to them. In the United States, we don't always live, but what distinguishes us is that we try and try and try again. Yeah, we start out as a society where only men descended from Europeans can vote if they have property. Then we allow anyone who doesn't have property to vote. Then we allow men who were former property themselves to vote because we free the slaves and invite them to be citizens. Then we allow women to vote. Do we start out perfect? No. Are we perfect now? No, we're not. But we try and try and try to work at it, to bring us to a, remember the quote, more perfect union. That's what it's about. Other societies, with all of their glories, are not focused in the same way on the value of the individual life. And that matters. It matters with the Japanese in World War II. You know where else it matters? Not only with the Nazis. Today, we have the American war on terror, and we have what's going on in Israel with the Arabs. There are people, maybe in this room, who say there's no real difference between an American or an Israeli soldier and an Arab Islamist. They both kill, right? They both kill in the name of God or in the name of politics. So they're the same. A pox on both their houses. To which I say, no, absolutely not. That's totally wrong. Our terrorist enemies and the enemies of Israel intentionally target civilians. The more, the merrier. They want to hit dense packed civilian population. And where do they launch these attacks from? Hospitals, orphanages, schools, apartment buildings, places filled with civilians. In both the case of the Israeli and the American forces, we don't do what we did in World War II. Oh, there's enemies over there. Flatten it with artillery, and then we'll go in and mop up. No. We send troops in at greater risk to intact neighborhoods because we don't want to kill women and children, civilian men. Our pilots fly lower and slower than they have to hit the corner of the building that has the terrorist base and try to miss as much as possible the orphans in the rest of the orphanage. Those people hide behind their own civilian population, daring Israel and daring the United States to kill as many of their women and children as possible. What courageous people. No, there is not a moral equivalency. A murderer, a soldier, and a bandit all kill. But a murderer kills for his own twisted pleasure. A bandit kills for personal gain. A soldier kills to protect. That matters. The Israelis and the Arabs, the way they fight, how they deal with civilians, are totally different. The Americans and the Arabs, the Islamists that we're fighting, totally different. And to not recognize this because you don't want to take a stand, because you don't want to notice the difference, because it's easier for you to be superior, is to in some way abdicate your own intelligence, your own status as a thoughtful being. Your job in this world is to make judgments, to make value judgments. I don't ever expect anyone to accept my word and come up with my personal values. I don't want that for you. I want you to come up with your own value system, and I want you to learn how to notice things that violate it. And I want you to learn how to stand up for what you believe in. Not what I believe in, what you believe in. That's a Western value. I value your individuality, and I value your individual choice about what you believe in and what you stand for. But that is not a universal thing. The world is not filled with people who care about you or who want you to come up with your own ideas. Au contraire, the world is filled with people who have very different ideas about the priorities that are important in life. Do we do ourselves any favor by playing the politically correct game of moral relativism? Or is there a duty to notice when something is wrong and to then step up and say something or do something about it? That's a question. And it's a very important question to me, because in the end, I could care less how well you do on my final exam. I'd like you to do well because it would indicate that you've been paying attention. But what really matters to me is, do you have the interest in learning about things so that you can come up with your own sense about what is right and wrong with the world and do something in your life to try to make the world a better place? Are you willing to take the time to learn the history, to learn the context, to learn the cultural values? I admire the Japanese self-sacrifice, but I'd be lying if I said that Japan and America are the same. Imperial Japan was very different from us. And since World War II, we have worked very hard very hard to try to help Japan adopt some of our valuation of the individual human life. And the truth is, we won't know how successful we've been until the failure of the American alliance. At some point in the future, Japan and America will not be as close as we've been. And at that point, what will Japan do? I have no clue. I hope they'll go on valuing human life. But even now, if a young person doesn't get into Japanese Yale, which is Tokyo University, there's a good chance they'll kill themselves. Even now, suicide is considered to be an honorable way to deal with failure. When cute little puppet Yoda says to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, "Do or do not, there is no try," it sounds like a motivational speech, but in Japan, it's do or do not. And if you do not, you may end yourself or be ended by the shame that you've brought to your family. So I ask you, again, and now I'm waiting for an answer from somebody who hasn't yet spoken. Should you look at history through a moral lens with the intent of learning so that you can make value judgments? Yes or no, and why? That's my question.
Could you repeat it one more time?
Should you look at history morally with the intent of deciding what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil? Not with arrogance, but with humility. To recognize the war crimes that happen. To recognize that some societies, even though people believe in them, are evil and need to be stopped, or are good and need to be helped. Does that have a place or not? Does making moral judgments have a place in the study of history or not? Why or why not? Okay, you've spoken. I'm looking for somebody who hasn't said anything yet. And I'll call on people who have. Yes?
If you don't look on it morally, then you won't get any personal benefit from it. Like what decisions are, like how to make decisions, like so that you do what's morally right instead of just what's like politically right or like scientifically right. But like if you don't look at it from a moral standpoint, you're not getting the benefit from it.
Okay. Now I'll take. Okay, all right. Thank you for waiting.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say like what other ways for me to like look at, like I think it's the most like unbiased way to look at history. I think if you look at it morally, because you could say like, oh, that person did that thing wrong, but this person also did that thing wrong. Like you don't have to like. I feel like the most important thing in like looking at history is like looking at it from like a totally like not biased standpoint, I guess. Yeah.
Well, when you look at things morally, you're looking at it with bias. I am willing to say that since we're using the example of the Japanese in World War II, or we'll talk about the Mongols at some point. We talked about the Huns. That there is a better side and a worse side in those fights.
Yeah, obviously that's what I'm saying, but I'm saying like that you have to acknowledge that both sides do stuff wrong. Obviously, that's what I'm saying. Like some people don't do that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's important to acknowledge both sides. The truth. That's the thing. Okay, you got it. I'm really thick when it comes to understanding what you're saying today. It has to do maybe with how I slept last night. But do we live in the world we want to live in, or do we live in the world that exists? You know, I had a person ask me earlier today, well, was it an ideal thing to send the Jewish people into a land already inhabited by Arabs? And I said, well, yes and no. Here's why. Here's the historical reason. But right now, that doesn't matter. Israel exists. It exists because of the Hitler attempt to wipe out the Jews. Without the final solution, there would be no state of Israel. The state of Israel is a product of the final solution. So does it do any good to question the decision to establish Israel? I don't think so. I think the question is, where do we go from here? And I hope we don't go, let's kill all the Jews. That is not, I think, a defensible position morally. Quite the contrary. I think that's evil. This morning, I had a guy write on my YouTube channel a comment on a video I did for European history about the Battle of Leningrad. Battle of Leningrad was a siege that lasted over 900 days. Leningrad was the second most important city of Russia. It's now called St. Petersburg. And in that 900-day siege, no food got in, except over the ice in the wintertime across a lake. There was massive cannibalism, because it was the only thing that they could do to survive. And I pointed this out. This is part of the historical record. And I don't know why, but this guy got really offended by that. He said, oh, there's no evidence, blah, blah, blah. There's plenty of evidence. But I said, look, if you thought that I was blaming the people of Leningrad, starving people are going to do what starving people are going to do. Some of them will die, some of them will eat other people. Starving to death, their families are starving to death, they want to survive. The people who are responsible are Hitler and Stalin. Stalin for refusing to let Leningrad evacuate, and Hitler for deciding to let the people of Leningrad all starve to death. They're both responsible, not the people. He then came back at me with obscenities, so I cut off the conversation because dealing with crazy people is a bad idea, even online. We don't live in the world we want to live in. We live in the world that exists. But some people really want to play the game of not seeing any evil, not recognizing any evil, because it's easier. It's that what I mean when I talk about morality. Thank you for waiting.
I think the hardest part of looking at history in a moral way is coming over is like being able to look over your own personal biases and your relative truths, and also being able to accept that like your beliefs are not automatically the right ones, and that everyone else's isn't automatically the wrong ones. No one's perfect. There's no one true way to think.
Okay. I actually agree with you completely, which is why I think it's important to know your own culture before you learn, or as you learn others. Okay? I would not be in favor of a view of history that looks at things from a strictly Jewish scribal law point of view or Christian point of view or anything like that, or even an exclusively American point of view. There are other points of view that matter. The heroism of the Japanese in World War II is worth recognizing. However, I'm not a moral relativist. I believe that mass murder is wrong in almost every case. So I think that beneath that recognition of your own okay, I have a cultural bias. I am a Westerner. I value the life of each individual. I also value freedom. So if you are to criticize my society for allowing Satan to tempt the righteous by being too free, I will disagree with you. From my point of view, our freedom is a good thing. From the Islamist point of view, our freedom is nothing less than satanic. In the case of the Japanese, their belief was the God Emperor's life justified everything. And therefore they were willing, and they treated each other with incredible cruelty. But as a Westerner, I will still decry the evil that they did in China. Look, they did horrible things. They did try to practice genocide in several regions of China. So, do I think that genocide is objectively wrong? Yeah, unless we suddenly are invaded by roach people who want to eat us, in which case I'll want to wipe out all the roach people. But when dealing with human beings, no, I don't think genocide is justifiable. So, in that sense, you have to become complex. On the one hand, you should recognize your bias, recognize that other cultures have different values, but then underneath that, does that mean you deny any rectitude to your own point of view? I don't think so. I think that it is reasonable for a thoughtful, objective person to say, no, it's wrong to behead prisoners. It's wrong to do what they did to the children with the wall in their head. It makes sense?
Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, I'm not looking for your agreement. I think when I say makes sense, I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Any other thoughts on this? Here's why it's important. In World War II, Hitler kills 6 million Jews or so. Hitler orders their death. Final solution to the Jewish question. You'll learn about it next year. Since 1945, when the world learns truly the scope of the final solution, the words never again have been said again and again and again. Never again will we let a genocide happen under our noses. Never again will we allow it to happen. And yet, there have been numerous genocides. It's not never, it's infrequent, but it happens. For example, in 1975, the communists take over Cambodia. In 4 years, they kill over a third of the population of Cambodia for having fillings in their teeth, for wearing eyeglasses, for knowing foreign languages or advanced math, because they wanted to bring things back to 1,000 years ago, some idyllic past. And they literally murdered over 1 million people in a population that was just 3 million. In Rwanda, in the 1990s, the Hutu and the Tutsi had been two tribes that were symbiotic. A Hutu power party takes over the country and in a couple of weeks wipes out almost all Tutsis that don't flee to another country. You can't drive down a road without rolling over bodies. And there are others. Genocide happens when people don't take a stand. So, that's why we talked about this. Tomorrow, we continue with the Middle Ages. Thank you. Come again.